She's convicted of killing 7 newborn babies and attempting to kill 7 more. In English tabloids, she's even referred to as Nurse Death. But now a major update in the case of Lucy Letby. Just this week, a panel of international doctors announced she may have been wrongly convicted, and they say they've got evidence. So what does all this mean? Right now she's serving 15 life prison sentences. Could she be released? For that, we're going to turn to international attorney Meg Strickler. But first, some background in the case.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in mortality rate?
Yes.
That's Lucy Letby, a one-time neonatal nurse across the pond. She began her career in 2012 at the Countess of Chester Hospital in northern England, about 40 minutes south of Liverpool. Almost from the start, there were some red flags with Lucy. In one instance, back in 2013, she gave a baby 10 times the correct amount of morphine. Then in 2016, she gave antibiotics to an infant who wasn't prescribed them. But what may be the most shocking and what prosecutors would eventually highlight at her trial is the stark number of infant deaths all on Lucy's watch. For example, at training sessions between 2012 and 2015, there were what experts called potentially life-threatening situations during 1/3 of Lucy's shifts. The tail end of that time frame in 2015 is the same year that prosecutors say Lucy began murdering infants. That's when an abnormal number of babies died or had near-death experiences at the hospital. Alarm bells really went off when officials learned Lucy was there for almost all of the deaths, like the instance when she gave that baby 10 times the correct amount of morphine or gave the other infant antibiotics who didn't need them. During that time frame, another baby was also found with water in their breathing tube. But it was more than just hospital staff that were picking up on all of this. The parents of some of the victims saw some strange things too, including the mother of a baby boy who passed away. At Lucy's trial, this mother testified. She said she heard her baby scream before finding him in the room with Lucy. This mother testified she found her son with blood around his mouth. She asked Lucy about it, and Lucy apparently said, quote, "Trust me, I'm a nurse." That same baby died just a few hours later. By 2016, the concerns were mounting against Lucy, so she was removed from the neonatal unit and placed on clerical duty instead. But that didn't last for long. Lucy filed a grievance complaint, and the board actually sided with her. After that, staff members were told to apologize to her. That's not the end of Lucy Letby's story, though. The investigation continued, and the findings were even more shocking. For example, looking through her internet search history, investigators found that Lucy searched for 11 different families, all whose infant had died at the hospital. She didn't search this 11 times. She searched 11 different families for a grand total of 31 times. She even sent a sympathy card to one of these families. But before she sent the card, Lucy took a picture of it, which investigators later found. Prosecutors say Lucy snapped this pic as a way to revisit or relive the memory. So all of this is pretty intense, but things get even more creepy. When searching Lucy's home, investigators found copies of sensitive medical records that were under her bed. Amongst them, some records of the babies who had been killed. There was also some disturbing handwritten notes found too. This is a direct quote from one of the notes. Lucy wrote, quote, "I am evil. I did this." In another note, she wrote, quote, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them." A later inquiry found Lucy had texted a coworker about how to get away with murder and told her friend, quote, "I could give you some tips." Even with this evidence against her, when Lucy was arrested, she maintained her innocence.
They told me that there had been a lot more deaths and that I'd been linked to somebody that was there for a lot.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you?
I think we don't just notice as a team in general, this and stuff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Lucy was first arrested in July 2018, but released on bail for nearly a year. In June 2019, she was arrested again and was finally charged in November of 2020 with 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder. Lucy Letby pleaded not guilty to the charges, saying that the deaths were a result of staffing shortages at the hospital. She even took the stand and denied committing any of the crimes. In the end, though, Lucy was found guilty on all 7 counts of murder and 6 of the attempted murder charges. A jury ruled she was not guilty on 2 of the attempted murder charges, and the rest were deadlocked. In summer of 2024, a jury took a second look at those deadlocked charges and found Lucy was guilty of another attempted murder charge. Lucy Letby is now serving 15 life sentences. She appealed her verdict twice, and twice it was shot down. Because of that double attempt, it could be tricky for Lucy to have another chance with an appeal, but a panel of international doctors say she deserves one, arguing Lucy may have been wrongly convicted. This panel is headed by Dr. Lee of Canada. He first heard about the case from Lucy's defense during one of her appeal attempts. At the trial, the prosecution had cited an academic paper that Dr. Lee himself wrote back in 1989. The paper focused on air embolisms, saying that they can cause a baby's skin to become discolored. The prosecution highlighted all of these findings, saying Lucy injected air into some babies, causing these deadly embolisms. But Dr. Lee, again the author of this very academic paper that was cited, says the prosecutors who cited it actually misinterpreted his research. He sounded the alarm on all of this too. He offered to testify during one of Lucy's appeal cases, but 3 different judges all shot that down. So instead, Dr. Lee compiled a group of 14 doctors from across the world to review Lucy's case. Just a note, one of the doctors on this panel is Dr. Nina Modi, who's the former president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health right there in the United Kingdom. All of this to say, there are some pretty big names on this panel from doctors who have a lot of experience. BBC reports that these doctors got together and reviewed the case. They weren't familiar with the case at all before this investigation began, and they weren't paid for the investigation either. Their findings? That all the victims died of either natural causes or medical error. At a press conference just this week, Dr. Lee laid all of this out and gave some examples. In one instance, Lucy is convicted of killing an infant by injecting air into their stomach. Dr. Lee says the cause of death was actually a natural respiratory complication and chronic lung disease. In that same case, he said the baby had a bacterial illness that needed antibiotics, but the doctors didn't catch it. In a separate case, Lucy is convicted of murdering a baby by taking out the tube they used to breathe. Dr. Lee says the baby actually died because they were given the wrong size tube by a doctor who, quote, didn't know what he was doing. These findings seem like a win for the defense, but experts from the prosecution have spoken out too. A star medical expert in the trial was Dr. Dewey Evans, who spoke to the Sunday Times. He said, quote, what the prosecution stated was that some of these babies, as part of their collapse, had a skin discoloration, which has been described in Dr. Lee's paper in 1989. But, and it's an important but, the presence or absence of skin discolorations neither ruled out nor confirmed air embolism. It was not necessary. It's a useful paper. I don't want to do it down, but comparing how babies responded to treatment in the 1980s to how they responded to treatment in 2015, it's different. So from here, Lucy has a winding road back to the appeals court. Her defense has to submit an application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, also known as the CCRC. As described on its website, quote, the CCRC is the independent body that investigates potential miscarriages of justice in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Defendants can submit their cases to the CCRC for review if they believe they've been wrongly convicted. Now, in order to do that, the defense will need to present compelling and new evidence. Lucy's team has already submitted an application for review, and they believe Dr. Lee's panel is that new and compelling evidence needed to send them back to appeals court. I want to take a closer look at all of this, and for that, I'm going to bring in our expert today. It's criminal defense attorney Meg Strickler, who has experience with international law, which is why we brought her in today. And Meg, you and I have talked about this case in the past. Last time it was about really incriminating evidence against Lucy Letby, and now we kind of have the opposite. What do you make of the findings from this panel?
You know, I find this case really interesting, and I'm not sure what my opinion is yet. So I'm looking at it as if I was a judge in the appeal courts. And what the judges in the appeal courts thus far have said Dr. Lee coming on and saying, I'll testify, and that the evidence that they relied on with Dr. Lee isn't good. And they said that's not enough to overturn the convictions. That was the original storyline. And now they're going to the CCRC, excuse me, and saying it's not only Dr. Lee, it's a panel of renowned international experts. That, I think, might move the needle. It was one thing to have the guy who wrote the report that the prosecutors relied on to say, mm-mm. But now you have the experts saying, we have looked at everything, and we feel like we looked at everything with a smarter eye because, hello, we're physicians, and we think you have gotten this all wrong. And now I'm starting to think, wow, just wow.
Wow is right. As I was going through and researching this, I was just like blown away with the information because, as you said, yes, Dr. Lee has kind of been vocal about this before, but a judge, actually multiple judges, have shut him down and said, you can't testify. Why do you think that is, that he wasn't able to testify at the past appeals because there wasn't enough compelling evidence?
Yeah, and I'm going to liken it to the United States. Appellate work, at least for me, is so demoralizing and very hard because you really think, look at the facts, appeals court, you got it wrong. And then the appeals court might look at it and be like, and I'm talking vaguely, but in general, that's our arguments. And they'll be like, no, 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 that wasn't enough to overturn the convictions. That's literally what they said. That wasn't enough information from Dr. Lee to say that that was enough to overturn what was already found. Because they went through the proper channels and did an appeal. So that's why they're basically doing another appeal through this non-governmental agency to have relook at the cases, excuse me, the case and all of these poor babies. And what I find really hard is these poor families now have to revisit all of this pain. And I can't think they are able to continue to see this in the news. I think it's probably been too much for them because you already had 2015, 2016, now we're in 2025. And here you thought it was this young lady, Miss Letby, who did all this. And now all of a sudden you're hearing about the breakdown in healthcare, the breakdown of that particular hospital, and the breakdown of relying on studies from the 80s. I mean, it really makes you kind of question everything.
I've thought about the parents a lot in this because exactly what you said, they've been dealing with this for about 10 years, a decade at this point. And some have actually come out since news about Dr. Lee's panel with Lucy Letby and said, enough is enough. We already lived through it. We did the trial. We're seeing it in the news. It's too much. She's already been convicted. So if this, for some reason, would be able to go back to trial, we'll get to how that would happen in a second. But let's just say it did. What would it look like for these parents to go through it once again? Some of them who may have to testify again.
It'd be my hope, and I just want to say it'd be my hope that normally when you have a mistrial or when you have a case turned back to retry a case, I'm going to say normally, but as a general rule, the prosecutor might rethink the entire situation and negotiate a resolution so that we don't have to go through a whole nother trial, put the victims through all of this, just put the whole scene and just do a resolution. Because she got 15 whole life sentences. We've got a lot of negotiating to get that down. And she's still pretty young, this young lady. She's 35, I believe. So it would be my hope that there be some resolution that if she's culpable of anything, which I can't tell, then that's what she should serve her sentence for. And then the rest needs to go away. And I just want to comment on enough is enough. I get you with the victims, but there is a thing called justice, and a defendant does deserve justice as well. And if there really is massive holes on how the jury came to this decision, then we need to go back to this, revisit it, period.
It's a fine line to walk between the family and them feeling they have justice, but also the rights of the defendant too. And as we've talked about, Letby has come forward a couple times, I believe 2 appeals that were shot down. We're not going back to court, all of that. So now, you mentioned this at the start of the interview, basically her team has to go to this organization and present all of their findings. And if that organization sees what they're saying, believes it's compelling, they recommend it goes back to an appeals court. What would all of that look like?
Well, my guess is, and my hope is that with an entire panel being so passionate. I saw one press interview that came out in the past day where the doctor had said, look, I know this case better than the prosecutors. There's no way this young lady was the one who did all this. And he said it with such confidence. And the other thing is they're all doing it for pro bono. And they're already renowned experts. So it's not like they're doing it to get their name in the news. They have no need or want to do anything other than have justice be served. I think that is probably the most compelling. And then go back to the original issue is the prosecution had relied on Dr. Lee's 1980s paper that he co-authored. And now Dr. Lee is saying that's wrong. Something about the error and the embolism and these things, and I can't speak medical, but that has been debunked. And the word I saw on the news, which I thought was useful, was it got demolished, not just debunked. The concepts that the prosecution relied on has been demolished. And I like that word because that's a strong word to say, hey, we need to relook at this entire storyline and then have a trial on the facts with experts. And one other issue is she did not present an expert at her trial. So a lot of times you have battles of experts, okay, in cases, so that you have the prosecution have an expert say X, and then the defense will have an expert say Y, and then it's gone in the United States. The jury then looks at it and makes a decision. In this case, Letby did not present an expert. And I think that's a compelling argument as well to allow her to have a new trial and have her own experts look at the case.
Based on what you're saying to me, and I know you're a criminal defense attorney, so you can bring a good argument, but based on what you're saying to me, it sounds like they likely would say, okay, this probably deserves a second set of eyes and sending this back to the appeals court. What do you think? Do you think it's compelling enough to do that?
The only thing I find compelling here is the fact that it's a team, it's an entire panel of experts. That I feel like is making it a whole lot more compelling than just, I mean, I already thought it was compelling when I read about Dr. Lee saying it, but that clearly hadn't moved the needle. Now we have, and it's literally a panel of experts. And I feel like that's just much more compelling because it's not just one individual who's got a lot of experience and expertise. It's a group of individuals. And then the other thing is they're an international group. So they are very famous for their skills, their knowledge, their ability to look at these things with a mindset of saying, you got it wrong. And so I just feel like this is where they need to look back at the entire set of the issues that applied here and bring in more of what else occurred. You know, you heard about the mismanagement of patients there. You heard about other things, and then bring all that back in. And the problem is that if you try the case in 2025, everything's stale. So I feel like if this, and this is the part I don't know because we don't have the evidence, if the medical diagnoses of how these babies died really is because of X, not because of Y, meaning Letby is just not related to these deaths, the prosecution needs to look at that and offer a resolution that gets rid of this case. But there's a big if. I haven't looked at the medical evidence. We're just hearing what these experts are saying, but I trust these experts because there's multiple ones of them, and they're renowned experts.
It is interesting what you pointed out, the fact that these people are working pro bono, that there are 14 of them, and international. There is one that was kind of high profile there in the United Kingdom, but people from all over. Dr. Lee is from Canada. So to me, that does seem compelling. And what they are saying is that these babies died from natural causes or from medical error. So that then gets me thinking, we did talk about this a bit in the Lucy Letby case at trial, but could other people be responsible? I mean, not necessarily murder, but some sort of medical error or malpractice in some way that they weren't doing the right things. I mean, should that be investigated?
Well, you got to wonder. And I don't know enough. You know, we don't know. I don't think any of us know what was really going on there. And was there neglect? You know, and is this going to blow open a much larger issue with healthcare in that country? You know, and I don't know. And I think that is a pushing issue here where they don't necessarily want to open that up because healthcare, even in our country, is a bit problematic in areas because it's going to be that way. And I don't think it's a good thing. But if you recall, there was some background with Lucy Letby at some other hospital, and she was young and inexperienced. And I think by definition, that's problematic. You know, you don't really want to put someone taking care of young babies who's 20 something and not had that many years experience. That goes back to management. So these are a lot of moving parts that we don't have all of the specifics. But that was a large amount of babies that they charged. That's why she got 15 life sentences.
Yeah, it was 7 that she was convicted of murder and 7 more convictions of attempted murder. So quite a few. And she was actually charged with even more. The jury just couldn't come to a unanimous verdict on those. So really a large number of instances that we have here. But again, we have to weigh that with this panel of 14 doctors who are now saying she potentially was wrongfully convicted. I want to go back to what you were talking about with the battle of experts, though, because the prosecution obviously believes that they got it right, that she should be convicted. And one of their expert witnesses, a doctor, I believe, Dewey Evans, he testified during all of this. He was the expert witness for the prosecution. And he has now come forward since we've heard about this panel and said, I think everything was accurate. I mean, the prosecution brought their case. I still stand by it. So what does all of that mean? I mean, it's a he said, she said type of thing. It's expert versus expert. I mean, it's just a lot to comprehend.
Well, I can tell you from experience on that one that experts, just like politics, just like opinions, we all can have a lot of different opinions and we can look at a set of facts and analyze it in different ways. But what I think, again, moves the needle in this case, if you've got 14 folks who are looking at it and they all come to the general consensus about insulin and about the error with the embolism and all these different facts that I think will debunk the other gentleman's thought process. And it really will be the devil in the details. So if he's hanging his hook on a general concept of, yeah, I was right, I did it all fine then, did he? And then the other side really, and I guarantee they are going through each and every baby and each and every coroner report and each and every aspect of the last couple of hours of each baby's lives. And they're making sure they understand what medications went in, everything. So they're really going through the details. And they're not really going through, they past tense, they already have gone through all those details and have come to the conclusions they've come to today, which the other gentleman, has he looked at it recently with 2025 glasses versus 2014, 2015, and 2016 glasses? I don't know. And I think ego gets involved. I can tell you from experience, when you have experts who testify for one side, you get kind of, I can't think of the right word. You become very focused on your opinion and become a little stubborn. And, as a defense lawyer, we're cross-examining those experts. And you have to work very hard to develop a cross-examination that sticks with the facts and doesn't try to punch with their ego. You just start with the facts and look at the holes in how they became convinced of whatever they're convinced with, and also parts of their report, and look at the nuances of the report of parts where they didn't do X, or they didn't do Y, or they didn't do Z. That's what an effective cross is on an expert. And then, of course, you use the 14 experts to then debunk. And I swear, I read that word demolish. They've demolished how they thought this came about. And when you use that word demolish, that's very strong, confident words. So I don't think that the prosecution's expert has enough. And if the prosecution wishes to retry this case, they're going to need a team as well.
And as you pointed out, there are so many victims in this case, and going through it with a fine-tooth comb will take some time. Unclear where it's headed, but we're definitely going to keep following to see. Meg Strickler, thank you for coming on and walking through the case with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So I guess it still remains to be seen what's next for Lucy Letby, but things could be moving kind of slowly. That new panel isn't quite finished with their full report. They expect it to take at least until the end of the month. And that means it may be a while before we know if her case is actually headed back to appeals court. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.